5 panelists. 1 seat across from all of them. And the question that had nothing to do with her transcript, her research proposal, or the 3 recommendation letters sitting in the folder in front of them. "Let's be honest," said the man at the far end of the table, tapping his pen twice against a legal pad. "A lot of these scholarship slots get filled based on checking a box these days. So tell me, genuinely, what makes you think you actually earned a spot here and not just a demographic one?" The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. Aaliyah didn't blink. She folded her hands on the table the same way she had practiced in front of her bathroom mirror 4 nights in a row, and she answered the question anyway. Calmly, completely, and with a research proposal so precise that 2 other panelists actually leaned forward to listen. His name was Grant Ashford, a name printed in small type on the panel roster she'd been handed at the door, sandwiched between 4 other names she'd never have reason to remember at all. He wore his authority the way some men wear an expensive watch, visibly, deliberately checking to see if anyone noticed. The woman beside him, a program coordinator whose name tag read Renata Cole, shifted almost imperceptibly in her seat, the kind of movement that meant she'd heard a version of this question before and hated it every single time. Aaliyah noticed. She filed it away, the same instinct that had gotten her through 4 years of being the only person in most rooms who looked like her. She'd remember Ashford's name for the rest of her life. Just not for the reason he assumed, sitting there so pleased with himself. Down the table, an older panelist, a quiet man with reading glasses pushed up into graying hair, introduced earlier as Dr. Mensah, had glanced up sharply at Ashford's question, then just as quickly looked back down at his notes, his pen going still against the page. Aaliyah didn't clock the significance of that particular stillness. Not yet. She was too busy composing her answer, the one she'd rehearsed a dozen ways in her head on the drive over, the one that started with her actual research and never once mentioned the color of her skin, because she'd decided months ago that she wasn't going to let anyone make this interview about anything other than the work. It didn't stop at one comment. 3 more times over the next 40 minutes, Ashford circled back to the same idea, dressed in slightly different clothes each time. Reverse discrimination, he called it once, almost proudly, like he'd coined the phrase himself. Hard to know what's really merit-based anymore. Another time shaking his head like the whole system personally offended him. Aaliyah answered every single question on its actual merits, never raising her voice, never taking the bait, walking the panel through data modeling work she'd built from scratch in a lab that barely had funding for basic equipment. When the interview finally ended, she shook every hand at that table, including his. Walking out to the parking lot afterward, another applicant waiting for her own slot caught Aaliyah's eye in the hallway and murmured, just loud enough to hear, "Don't take it personal. He does that to everyone who looks like us. Every single year." Aaliyah managed a small, tired laugh and asked the question she hadn't planned on asking out loud. "Every year? How long has he been on that panel?" The other applicant shrugged, already halfway distracted by her own nerves. "Since before I applied. 6 years, maybe 7. Ask anyone who's gone through it. Everyone's got a story about that guy." Aaliyah thanked her, wished her luck, and drove home, turning that number over in her head. 6 years. 7 maybe. She didn't know yet just how literally true that sentence was, or how much weight a single offhand comment in a parking lot was about to end up carrying. To understand why Aaliyah walked into that room and stayed so calm, you have to understand what she was actually walking away from if she lost her composure for even a second. Her mother had raised her alone since she was 6, working 2 jobs, one of them cleaning the very university buildings Aaliyah now hoped to do research in. There was no family fund, no legacy connection, no backup plan quietly waiting in reserve. This scholarship wasn't a nice-to-have line on a resume. It was the only realistic path to the kind of doctoral research funding that could actually change both their lives. And Aaliyah had known that fact, clearly and specifically, since she was 14 years old. She had built her entire academic career one careful decision at a time, around exactly this moment. Around walking into a room like that one and having an answer for absolutely anything anyone could throw at her. Which was exactly why, when Grant Ashford tried to make her doubt whether she'd earned her seat at that table, she didn't doubt it for even half a second. She'd done the math on that seat 1,000 times before he ever asked, usually late at night, usually with a calculator and a spreadsheet of tuition numbers open on her laptop next to her actual coursework. Her mother had never once asked her to feel guilty about the hours spent studying instead of working a part-time job like most of her classmates did. had in fact insisted on it, working a third shift some weekends so Aaliyah's evenings stayed clear for research instead. "You don't get to carry both of our exhaustion," her mother used to tell her. "Carry your books. I've got the rest." Aaliyah had carried that sentence into every single interview she'd ever walked into since. She carried it into that room with Grant Ashford too. There had been other costs along the way, smaller ones that never made it into any application essay. The summer she'd turned down an unpaid research internship at a better-funded lab because unpaid simply wasn't a word her family's budget had room for. The 2 years she'd commuted 90 minutes each way to a community college before transferring, because it was the only path that didn't require loans she couldn't picture ever paying back. None of that showed up as a number on any scoring sheet. It showed up instead as an 11-page research proposal built with more care and more hours than almost anyone else in that applicant pool could have afforded to spend. Because for Aaliyah, this was never one opportunity among several. It was the one. 6 weeks later, the program's results went public, and Aaliyah wasn't just named a winner. She was named the sole recipient that entire cycle, the only applicant to clear the funding threshold outright, with what the program director called in her announcement email, one of the strongest composite panel scores we've seen in years. Aaliyah read that sentence 3 times before she let herself believe it. But 2 days after the public announcement, sitting in a private follow-up meeting to go over funding logistics, the program's administrative assistant slid over a printed copy of her full scoring breakdown as a routine formality. 5 panelist scores, 1 per row. 4 of them were near-perfect, generous, detailed with actual written praise in the margins. The 5th row next to Grant Ashford's name had a single number in it. 0. No comment. No explanation. Just a flat, empty 0 sitting there next to 4 rows of glowing praise, like it belonged to an entirely different application entirely. The administrative assistant, a soft-spoken man named Devon who clearly hadn't looked closely at the sheet before handing it over, glanced at it upside down from across the table and frowned. "Huh," he said half to himself, already reaching to take it back. That's probably a data entry error. I'll flag it for the coordinator." Aaliyah asked to keep her copy anyway, folded it carefully into her bag and thanked him for his time. She smiled the whole walk back to her car. She didn't let herself think about it again until she was alone that night. The folded sheets spread flat on her kitchen table under the one working light bulb in the room. Aaliyah stared at that number for a long time before she said anything out loud. A 0 wasn't a low score. A 0 was the kind of number you give something that doesn't exist at all. Not a weak answer, not a mediocre proposal, but nothing, as if her entire 40-minute interview and 11-page research plan had simply never happened in front of him. She thought about escalating it immediately, formally, in writing. Instead, she did something quieter first. She called her undergraduate research advisor, a woman who had mentored her since freshman year, and she read the number out loud over the phone, half expecting to be told she was overreacting. Her advisor went silent for a long moment. Then she said something Aaliyah hadn't expected at all. "Before you do anything, I want you to talk to someone. There's a professor on that review board, Dr. Mensah, who reached out to me once years ago about something almost exactly like this. Call him first." Aaliyah asked the obvious question. Why him specifically out of everyone at that university? Her advisor was quiet for a second too long before answering. "Because 6 years ago he called me about a student of mine with almost the exact same story. A perfect panel, 1 unexplained 0. I told him it was probably nothing. I've thought about that conversation more than I'd like to admit since then." Aaliyah sat with that answer for a long moment after they hung up, staring at the fold marks on the printed scoring sheet, before she finally picked up her phone again and typed out a message to a name she'd never spoken to in her life. Dr. Mensah agreed to meet Aaliyah off campus, at a coffee shop 2 blocks from where any of his colleagues might recognize either of them. He was older, careful with his words, and visibly uncomfortable before he'd said more than 3 sentences. Years earlier he told her he'd sat on a different funding committee with Ashford and noticed the same exact pattern. A single 0, unexplained, attached only ever to applicants who happened to be black, buried among otherwise glowing panels. He'd raised it quietly at the time, informally, to a program coordinator who'd since left the university entirely. Nothing had come of it. He'd told himself for years afterward that he'd imagined the pattern, that one committee wasn't enough data to mean anything. "I let it go," he told Aaliyah, staring into his coffee rather than at her. I've regretted that for 6 years. I'm not letting it go this time. He pulled out his own phone and showed her something he'd apparently kept for 6 years without quite knowing why. A screenshot of an old email thread, the program coordinator's reply short and dismissive. Thanks for flagging, I'll keep an eye on it. Nobody, as far as he could tell, ever had. I don't have proof of a pattern, he told her honestly, closing his phone. I have a memory and a bad feeling in one email that went nowhere. That's not enough on its own. But if you're willing to ask the right questions formally, I'll help you ask them. For the first time since she'd seen that 0 on the page, Aaliyah understood she wasn't just fighting for her own scholarship anymore. What Aaliyah and Dr. Mensah didn't know was that Ashford had already heard, through a mutual colleague, that Aaliyah had requested her full scoring breakdown, an unusual request that had apparently made its way back to him within days. Ashford didn't wait to find out what she might do with it. Before Aaliyah could formally raise anything, an anonymous complaint reached the program's ethics office alleging that portions of her research proposal closely resembled a paper published 2 years earlier. A serious accusation that, if substantiated, could mean not just losing the scholarship, but a formal academic misconduct finding on her record entirely. The timing wasn't subtle to anyone paying close attention. But the program was obligated, by policy, to pause her funding and investigate the claim before anything else could move forward, which meant that for the second time in 1 month, the person under scrutiny in this story was Aaliyah, not the man who'd given her a 0 for existing. Her funding was frozen the same afternoon the complaint was logged, a formality, the email said, standard, while the ethics office reviewed the matter. Aaliyah read that email standing in her kitchen, in the exact spot where she'd first spread out that folded scoring sheet weeks earlier, and for a moment she let herself feel every bit as small as Ashford had clearly been hoping she would. She called Dr. Mensah instead of her mother, because she didn't yet know how to say any of this out loud to someone who'd sacrificed so much to get her this far. They're allowed to do this, he said grimly after a long pause. But they're not allowed to do it without a fair review. Bring me everything you have. Every draft, every timestamp, every version history you can find. Aaliyah spent the rest of that night doing exactly that, digging through old cloud storage backups for a research draft she'd almost deleted a year earlier to free up space, grateful for once, for her own habit of never actually deleting anything permanently. By 2 in the morning she had a folder of her own. Timestamps, revision histories, an email chain with her advisor discussing this exact proposal 8 months before the paper Ashford's complaint referenced had even been submitted anywhere. It wasn't lost on her, assembling that folder at 2 a.m., how similar this felt to something that must have happened to someone else before her. She just didn't yet know how close to true that guess actually was. The formal review meeting took place 2 weeks later, Aaliyah on one side of the table with the actual published paper and her original drafts, timestamped a full 8 months before the paper in question had even been submitted for publication. Proof plain and simple that if anything the resemblance ran the other direction entirely. Dr. Mensah sat beside her, not as her advocate exactly, but as a board member with his own set of questions now on the table. Before the meeting could close he asked to present something separately. A small, quiet dataset he'd spent 2 weeks compiling on his own time, cross-referencing every applicant Ashford had personally scored across the last 6 review cycles against their overall panel averages. The room went very still while he laid it out, 1 row at a time. Ashford, seated 3 chairs down, opened his mouth to object and then, visibly recalculating something behind his eyes, closed it again without a word. I'd like the board to authorize a full audit, Mensah said, closing his folder, of every application grant Ashford has personally scored in the past 6 years. Not just this one. I should have asked for this 6 years ago when I first noticed the pattern and let it go. I'm not making that mistake twice. The program director, a composed woman near the head of the table, looked from Mensah's dataset to Ashford's now carefully blank expression, and then, after a silence that stretched long enough for Aaliyah to hear the building's air conditioning cycle on, said simply, "Motion noted. We'll authorize a full 6-year review effective immediately, and Mr. Ashford will be recused from all board business until it's complete." The audit took 19 days. What it found didn't leave much room for interpretation. Across 6 years and 41 applications Ashford had personally scored, every single black applicant, 11 of them total, had received a score at or near 0, regardless of their overall panel average, regardless of research quality, regardless of recommendation strength. 6 of those 11 had been quietly rejected outright, their overall composite scores dragged down just enough by his single number to fall below the funding line, never knowing that one specific score sitting alone among 4 or 5 glowing ones was the actual reason they'd been told no. 2 of them, the audit later confirmed, had left academic research entirely in the years since, believing, like Aaliyah almost had, that they simply hadn't been good enough. Aaliyah's 0 hadn't been personal cruelty aimed at her individually. It had been a pattern running quietly for 6 years, that she happened to be the first person with both the standing and the help to actually catch. Dr. Mensah read the final audit summary out loud to her over the phone, his voice unsteady in a way she hadn't heard from him before, not even in the coffee shop. 11 names, he said. I keep thinking about the 6 who got a letter telling them no and never once knew why. I keep thinking that could have been fixed 6 years ago if I'd pushed harder the first time I noticed. Aaliyah didn't have an easy answer for him. She just told him the truth, that he'd pushed hard enough this time, and that was the part that actually mattered now. The audit findings went further than either of them had expected when they first sat down in that coffee shop weeks earlier. Investigators found that Ashford's near-zero scores had never once been flagged by the program's own review software, because the scoring system had no mechanism for questioning a single outlier score as long as it fell within the technically allowed range. A gap in the process nobody had thought to close in over a decade of using it. The fix, once identified, took the program's technical team less than a week to implement. The 6 years it had gone unnoticed took considerably longer to reckon with. The program's public statement 3 weeks later didn't use Ashford's name directly, but it didn't need to. It announced his removal from the review board, a full revision of the scoring process to require written justification for every single score going forward, and quietly, almost as an afterthought in paragraph 4, outreach to the 6 previously rejected applicants, offering them a chance to reapply with their original materials fully reconsidered. Aaliyah's scholarship was formally confirmed exactly as originally announced, her composite score recalculated without Ashford's 0, still comfortably the strongest in her cohort even without it. She never spoke to him again after that review meeting, and she never needed to. Weeks later, giving a short interview for the program's own newsletter, she was asked what she'd say to him if she ever got the chance. She thought about it for a moment, looking out through the lab window at nothing in particular, then answered plainly, the same steady voice she'd used across that interview table months earlier. I don't think I'd say anything to him, honestly. I don't think he was ever really asking me a question that night. He'd already decided the answer before I sat down. She paused, and when she spoke again, it was less for him and more for anyone else who might one day sit in that exact same chair. He spent the whole interview asking if I deserved to be there. Turns out he was the one who didn't. Then, almost as an afterthought, she said that you should like this video and absolutely demolish that subscribe button. And while you're at it, rub the belly of that cute little bell so the algorithm knows that stories about sweet justice deserve to be seen. And I'm off.